Hello there, and thank you for joining us. This is our webinar series on assisting the federal workforce with planning for uncertainty. My name is Brian Kuhn, your host today, 24 years in the financial services business with a focus on helping federal employees. I am the author of Total Compensation, a practical guide to federal employee benefits. Today, though, I'm very excited to introduce Tammy Flanagan. She's our guest today. She's provided retirement planning assistance to federal employees since 1985. She's a sought-after speaker and presenter at pre-retirement seminars, conferences, and online training events. She's the Senior Benefits Director at the National Institute of Transition Planning and author of a popular weekly retirement planning column for Government Executive Online magazine since 2006. She's a member of NARF, or the National Active and Retired Federal Employees Association, since 1988. Tammy, thanks for joining us. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too, Brian. All of that says I'm dating myself, but that's good. That means I've got wisdom, right?
Yes, absolutely. Been around a while, but probably not through anything like this. Interesting times.
Absolutely.
I have a variety of questions for you today. We're going to put out some content to help the federal workforce. Hopefully they are doing okay as we deal with this uncertainty. So I want to start, what are some of the most surprising things you've seen over the past 30 days or so?
Well, Brian, this past 30 days has been 100% surprising. I mean, we knew as federal employees, as a group of workers, we knew that this year was going to be a year of downsizing, a year of reducing the size of the workforce, trying to make the government more efficient. And I don't think anybody would argue that that was a good idea. It's the way we're going about it that is really surprising me. To me, it's very unprofessional, anywhere from the chainsaw on TV to the memo that said fork in the road. I mean, this is just not the way the government does business with the public or with ourselves. So it's been very demeaning to federal employees and very stressful. Anything to the most recent email that came out saying that you've got to have 5 bullet points of what you're doing on your job, otherwise consider yourself resigned. I mean, to me, that's a threat, which we don't do to each other. You know, I just don't understand why it has to be done this way, because we have other ways of doing this in federal service.
So retirement is one of the topics that we'll cover, but I can imagine a lot of federal employees are starting to think about that given the environment they're now in. So what are the key decisions that federal employees must make when they retire?
Yeah, well, they're kind of forced into this involuntarily this year, but normally it's, you know, can I afford to retire? That's the first question, and that's where people like yourself come into play, because you can put all the pieces together. You can help them decide if their savings are going to be enough and if their pension and their Social Security benefits all fit together. So affording to retire, that's certainly one of the first things you got to figure out if you're planning on leaving. The second thing is, am I mentally ready for this big change in my life? You know, for some people, their job is their life. You know, they really have a lot wrapped up in their identity as a federal employee and their position in government, and they just are very passionate about the work that they do. So making that switch from federal employment, maybe to the private sector, maybe to a life of leisure, maybe to taking care of a loved one, you know, that's a big change for most people. But then when it boils down to actually filing for retirement, there's some decisions that have to be made at the time you've chosen to retire, anywhere from choosing the best date to retire. And there are differences between the end of the month or the end of the year. And then there's decisions to be made regarding your service, because your retirement's based on your length of service. And some of it needs to be more thoroughly documented. Some of it needs to be, we call it making a deposit or making a buyback to make that time creditable, such as military service. Employees who are married have a big decision to make about leaving a survivor annuity or a partial survivor annuity for their spouse, and that's a decision they make together. So there's a lot of those types of decisions that are made through the process of retirement, through the process of filling out the application. And then it gets to those other things like Medicare, because federal employees, other than postal, but most federal employees can choose whether or not to take Medicare, because their federal health insurance will still cover them. So that's a big confusing decision for many retirees. And then it comes down to when to claim Social Security and what to do with all that money I've saved in the thrift. So lots of decisions, lots of very important decisions to make.
Yeah, and I agree with that comment about it's a mental decision to be ready to retire. I'm working with a lot of federal employees who, you know, they didn't want to leave. They enjoy their contribution. They enjoy working with their coworkers. And now this is sort of the timelines are potentially changing. It can be difficult. So as we speak, they are working through the steps of a reduction in force, as we understand. So can you talk about past reductions in force the federal workforce has had and how this one might be different?
Oh, this is very different because this isn't really the way we conduct a reduction in force in federal service. There's steps to take. There's ways to make it easier on the workforce so that it's not such a crunch to get out right away, or you're not going to be fired for something you didn't do. So normally it's a situation of first making it a voluntary action, not like the voluntary resignation that was offered on the 28th, but more of a voluntary early retirement, maybe with a buyout of, you know, our buyouts were only $25,000, which a lot of people laughed at because private sector buyouts can literally be in the millions. But for our workforce, that 25,000 sometimes was just enough to give someone a little cushion of cash so they can make that transition and go into retirement maybe a little sooner than they had planned, but it really isn't that much of a hardship for them. Now, if that buyout didn't work or if the employee wasn't eligible for early retirement, oftentimes they were offered a different job. You know, there was a priority placement program in place to allow people to move around within the agency into other jobs that they might be qualified for so they could maintain their job. So that was an option. You know, the very last resort has always been to let people go, especially if it's not for cause, if they didn't do anything wrong. So the reduction in force, the actual involuntary separation, that was at the very last thing. For instance, I'll give you an example of that. When I was working at the FBI back in the 1980s, they were in the process of moving the whole fingerprint identification division, which took a whole floor up of the Hoover building downtown because it was all file cabinets and cards. And they automated that and they moved the whole operation to West Virginia, you know, near West Virginia University. So all those employees, you know, hundreds, I think there was probably thousands of employees who managed those files and processed those fingerprint identification. They had to pick their families up and move to West Virginia. But yet it was done in an orderly process. You know, we first tried to find jobs within the Bureau at headquarters for those employees who wanted to stay put. Some of those employees could be placed. Some of them picked up and moved and they went to West Virginia. And unfortunately, at the very end of the road, when we got down to the crunch, but meanwhile, these employees had a year or more to think about it. Some had to be involuntarily separated, but were free to go out and find other federal jobs, perhaps with a different agency. So we didn't feel that stress that we're feeling right now. And I say we because I was a federal employee. My husband retired from federal service, so I have a real strong connection to everybody who's going through this right now.
Yeah. So for anyone looking towards that, they're going to have analysis of their FERS pension. Most likely they are FERS. So let's walk through, for anybody who's a federal employee who's not entirely familiar or just wants a refresher, what influences the calculation of the basic retirement benefit or the FERS pension?
Yeah, so that FERS basic benefit, which really is not the Social Security piece, it's not the TSP or the Thrift Savings Plan piece. We call it, you know, the government pension or the FERS basic benefit. And this is what's administered by the Office of Personnel Management for most federal employees. So we first have to make sure we're eligible. There are specific age requirements, service requirements, and they have to come together so that you're actually entitled to an immediate retirement so you can start collecting it right away, keep your health insurance and your life insurance and all those valuable benefits. The calculation of it is influenced by your pay. So it's an average of your highest 3 years of pay rates. And then how much service do you have? You know, obviously, the more service, the more generous that benefit's going to be. And then depending on your retirement system, depending on your retirement coverage, it's going to be a formula based on that, whether it's civil service, which we have very few employees left under the old system, as we call it, or FERS, as the majority of our workforce is under FERS. But even under the federal employees retirement system, or FERS as we call it, there's different calculations for older employees, for younger employees, for law enforcement. So there's a number of different calculations. So I wanted to kind of show you the eligibility rules first, because this is what you have to meet to collect that pension benefit. We call it, immediate optional retirement. I know these words sound very government-wise, but they're words that every of the 2.4 million employees who work for the government, they all recognize. It's a common phrase. When you throw in fork in the road, we don't know what that means. But when it comes to optional retirement, you have to reach your minimum retirement age, which is 57 for many of our employees who were born 1970 or later. Or if it's someone like me, a little older in federal service, you might be able to retire at 56 or somewhere between 56 and 57. So right around the time Social Security age was switching from 65 to 67, which has been phasing in since 1983, the government, when they created FERS, did the same thing. They moved that age from 55 to 57, and it's still being phased in today. So that's why we call it minimum retirement age. Now, some people will say, what's a full career? Well, I would say it's probably 30 years or more, because that allows you to retire with an unreduced benefit as early as your MRA if you have that much service. Keep in mind, the average federal employee typically doesn't retire at 57. Most of them retire 61 to 62, because it's not until age 62 you start getting cost of living adjustments. You don't qualify for Social Security until age 62. So there's some real advantages to working a little later than just becoming eligible. You want to make sure, again, going back to affording it. Now, if you're older when you come into federal service, maybe you already spent a career in the military, or maybe you worked in the private sector. So we got a lot of employees who come in their 40s and 50s. For them, they can retire with less service. So at age 60, you only have to have 20 years or more. And at 62, 5 years of civilian service will get you at least a small pension, plus the ability perhaps to continue your insurance into retirement, which can be very valuable, as most people realize. Now, we have different groups of employees, like our law enforcement officers, firefighters, air traffic controllers. They're subject to a mandatory retirement because of the nature of their work. For most of them, it's age 57 that they have to retire. So they do retire well before they're eligible for Social Security. And their retirement requirements go down to 50 with 20 years, or any age if they have 25 years of service. As you can see by the columns on that chart, FERS supplement is something that a lot of folks will receive if they retire younger than 62. And that was designed by Congress when FERS was implemented back in 1987 to provide a bridge between your retirement and qualifying for Social Security. It's because the FERS system was set up as a three-tiered system. You really need all three parts of it to really afford to retire comfortably. So that piece that represents Social Security, we call it a supplement. It's also paid by the Office of Personnel Management. And in Congress right now, it's not the first time, but it's once again on the chopping block where they're talking about getting rid of it. Then you got the column for FEHB, FEGLI, and FEDVIP. That stands for our insurance, our health benefits, life insurance, and dental and vision. With the health and life insurance, employees have a requirement of having that coverage for 5 years right before they retire, and then it becomes a benefit they can transition into retirement with them. So that's what most people try to work towards. We call this just retirement. Now on the next slide, you can see early retirement. And this was a big confusing question during the January 28th Fork in the Road memo that came out, because all it said was you can retire regular or early. It didn't say VERA. It didn't really describe whether this was discontinued service or voluntary early retirement, because of course the people writing the memo didn't know those phrases or didn't know how that works. So it took a couple of days till they clarified it with those frequently asked questions. And agencies came back and said, okay, I guess this is a VERA, which means it's an early retirement for employees who are 50 with 20 years, any age with 25 years of service. So again, it brings down that age requirement and service requirement for everybody who might have taken that deferred resignation / retirement. So that opened up many thousands of employees who became eligible to retire, who were less than those other eligibility rules that I just showed you. So we will see people at younger ages now being able to collect that immediate benefit. However, if you're 50 and you don't get a cost of living adjustment for 12 years until you're 62, you really have to consider the fact that you're probably not going to afford to retire at age 50. You're probably going to be looking for another job to supplement your income. But at least you might have your health benefits, life insurance, and so forth to take with you. Okay.
So one of the main scenarios I'm seeing is people, federal employees will be on some form of a countdown, right? They might have already known how many years and days they have left until their intended retirement, 2 years and 10 months, whatever program they're qualifying for by that date might be unique to them, but they have that date in their mind just to qualify for a number of the things that you just explained. So to help them, how does their leave factor into reaching those eligibility dates?
Yeah, so federal employees, they have both annual leave and sick leave. And so when they retire, typically they'll have a balance, of leave hours, just like any employee who gets those benefits. So with annual leave, there's a limit to how much employees can carry over from one year to the next. And for federal employees, typically it's 240 hours. So whatever amount they have, whether they have 40 hours or they have 240 hours, they'll get paid for that in a lump sum payment, because that's deferred compensation. That's money that would have been used to pay them to take a vacation or to spend time with family. So at the end of the road, any leftover hours is going to be paid to them in a lump sum benefit. Now, as far as their sick leave goes, as an effort to try to get employees an incentive not to abuse their sick leave, not to take it, just frivolously, because it really serves as a federal employee short-term disability protection. They have a payment, not a payment for sick leave, but a conversion of sick leave hours, that we convert those hours to service credit, and it gives you maybe a few more months of additional credit in the calculation of your benefit. For a FERS employee, that usually equates to somewhere between $5 and $11 a month extra for each month of sick leave that you might have not had to use, that you were able to save up for your retirement.
Mm-hmm. So one of the other things that is concerning me, and I bet it's on your mind as well, is the processing time of getting all of this done for a typical employee. I mean, if we have tens of thousands of people being added to the list that is exiting the government at any given time, what are you seeing in terms of the turnaround time or the normal processing time of someone to retire?
Yes, well, that is going to be an issue. I think it's going to be a pretty big issue. This is one of the places where I think everyone would agree that this part of the government needs to become more efficient, right? Because it shouldn't take 3 months to process a paper application. In fact, it shouldn't be paper, it should be electronic, and we're not there yet. So what happens in the process of retirement, the employee fills out a form, an application for retirement, turns it into their own agency's HR office, who has to process that by putting together literally a package of forms to send to the Office of Personnel Management, which includes records of their insurance coverages, their beneficiary designations, records of their service history. When did they start? When did they leave? When did they go part-time versus full-time? When did they serve in the military? Did they buy back their military time? So there's a lot of tedious review and analysis that has to be done once that whole package gets to the Office of Personnel Management. So OPM, as we call them, they're going to get that case in a FedEx envelope delivered by the mail, by either a FedEx driver or US mail, whichever way it comes, into their mail room. They put a 2-hole punch in it, put it in a cardboard folder, and it gets assigned to someone who's going to do that analysis to see how much of that service is documented properly. Is the package complete? Is there anything missing? Did everybody sign what they had to sign? This is a legal process as well. So you're saying by putting your signature on there that this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm electing to do. This is the benefits I'm providing for my spouse. This is true what I'm saying about, where I was born, all of those things. So you're signing this because it is a legal action that you're taking to separate from federal service. So it can take time in a normal situation. You can take 30 days, 60 days, 90 days for just a regular retirement to go through that whole process. You add to that doubling or tripling or possibly quadrupling the number of applications coming into OPM, who has already also done their own downsizing, and people have taken the deferred resignation. I don't know how long it's going to take. I'm telling folks that they want to have 6 months of cash on hand to pay their bills while they're waiting for this. It might help if they're eligible for Social Security, because that is an electronic election. Helps maybe if they want to access their TSP, but of course, taking money out of there is going to perhaps add a tax problem. So they really have to think about putting these pieces together and how long is it going to take, and really preparing for that as much as possible.
Yeah, that maintaining liquidity has been a common conversation I'm having with people as well. So that is all for people who are retiring in a variety of different forms. Then we have a different category of people who are actually have been terminated from the federal government. So then there is the topic of unemployment. So can you walk through some of the steps there?
Yeah, so when someone is terminated, whether it's for cause or whether it's because of a reduction in force or downsizing, whatever, they can collect unemployment if they're not eligible for retirement. So when I went over the voluntary early retirement rules, the age in service, the health insurance continuation, that's the same for an involuntary separation. So if somebody is terminated who's 50 with 20 years or any age with 25 years, they are still entitled to a retirement benefit as long as their termination was not for cause or misconduct. That's what bothers me about some of the language being used, saying that you're being fired rather than just downsized. Being fired means I did something wrong. And, sometimes they were just following the job that they were assigned to do. Case in point might be the FBI agents who were fired or reassigned because they were in charge of investigating the January 6th events. That was just their job. That's what they were told to do. So they didn't really do anything wrong according to the job they were assigned to do. So that can be an issue for someone if they're trying to retire. They've got the age, they've got the service, but if it was considered to be for cause, they may have forfeited that retirement benefit. Now, younger employees, those on probation, those who don't have 5 years of civilian service, they can just move on and go do something else. They can apply for unemployment through the state. They will also qualify for severance pay through their agency. Severance allowance can be up to a year's pay, depending on how old they are, how much service they had when they left. Unemployment can be over and above that, depending on the laws of the state where you live, because every state has their own unemployment rules. It's all under the auspice of the Department of Labor, but each state runs that program separately. So they certainly should apply for unemployment. They inquire about severance pay through their agency. Those are things that they should have coming to them if they're not eligible for an immediate retirement.
A lot of good information there. Appreciate the time very much. We have a slide here at the end, retirement tips for employees. If anything else you wanted to share?
Yeah, I just have to say, as much as you can, keep your head about you. Inquire with folks that know what they're talking about. Try not to go by the rumors you might be hearing, because I've had emails from people. I had one guy had 46 years of service, so obviously very qualified to retire. And somebody told him, well, if you get fired, over this downsizing effort, that he would lose his retirement. That is entirely not true. So, try not to listen to the rumors, try to get the facts as much as you can. The Office of Personnel Management still has a lot of good information there on their website to help you plan. Social Security Administration and TSP have the same. There's videos and webinars out there to watch. I think a lot of agencies, I've already had some seminars canceled due to budget restrictions. That's the first thing to go is training. So unfortunately, a lot of employees are not going to get that face-to-face training or even virtual training through their agency. You're lucky if you do. So learn as much as you can, ask questions, try to get information from reliable sources, do your financial planning and tax planning, and you might have to start looking for another job. Don't hesitate to start seeing what else is out there in the private sector. Your job might become privatized, so you might be able to go and do the same work in the private sector if that's what happens.
Yeah. All right, fantastic. Well, so for those watching who are part of the federal workforce, I would encourage you to personally reach out to both of us. We each have our roles in this and can help. So on the screen, we have Tammy's contact information, can do a deep dive on your employment history and all of the benefits that you have to help you make sure that you're fully maximizing those. And then for myself as a financial advisor, basically what we do is visualize the future from a cash flow standpoint, right? Let's map this out, talk through your goals and concerns, and we'll create what if scenarios and see how things can go. So on the screen is my personal contact information. If nothing more than to make sure you're on our distribution list for more webinars that will be coming your way. We're scheduled to record those with other professionals that we believe will be helpful. The QR code is an online scheduler, so it'll have my availability, and you can schedule a time. There's no cost to talk, and we'll see how we can help. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.